fourth consecutive launch of the Contraception Policies Atlas, European edition. Welcome everyone. And the launch is hosted by our host, dear host, Honorable Sophie Interveld and Honorable Terry Reintke, who are members of the European Parliament and members of the MEPs for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. Me, I'm Marina Davidashvili, I work for EPF, who are co-organizing this event. And while we are gathering, I'll just provide you some technical guidelines. And can I ask please for the slide? So technical guidelines, we ask kindly all participants to mute themselves and panelists to mute themselves until invited to speak. For attendees, microphone and video sharing is disabled, and attendees are invited to ask questions in the question and answer feature, and we will answer that all later on. The session is recorded, so we can send you the session after the webinar has ended. And also we made Polish and Spanish translation available. You can access the translation channel if you look at the globe icon below. I want to warn you that in the older version of Zoom, there is no Polish yet, so you have to use Portuguese, but Portuguese is for Polish, for those who could not update the Zoom. And so now I hope we are all gathered here. And while we are waiting, I will, to see that everyone is logged on, I will invite us to show some informational short clips reflecting how we can improve access to contraception in Europe. So we can play that for 2 minutes. Thank you very much. So now we are 5 minutes into our event, and I hope everyone could log in. I didn't receive any messages, so I hope everyone is here. Welcome everyone. And now I will give the floor to our two chairs. Ms. Sophie Interved and Mr. Reintke to start the meeting. The floor is yours, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe Terry, you want to kick off?
I'm fine. I thought you would kick off, but I'm happy to start. Thanks a lot, all the people who come to this event. It's a great pleasure. It's not the first time that we are launching the Contraception Atlas. It's actually already the fourth time. I can only tell you that we are really, really happy for the provision of this knowledge and also the graphical visualization that we can see, because it is very useful for people to find out about the access to contraception across Europe. And it's produced obviously by EPF, the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights, who is a very strong partner in providing knowledge about access to different forms of sexual and reproductive health and rights, including contraception. And you have already seen in the clip a little bit of maybe the areas that it covers. I can only tell you that from a political perspective, I can tell you that we in the European Parliament very often maybe have people in Europe maybe have the impression that this question of contraception is something that is already for a long time solved in Europe. But when you look at the findings of the Contraception Atlas already in the last years and also of this year's version, you can see that this is actually not the case and that this is still a struggle for a lot of people also in Europe to have proper access. And that actually in some member states, we even have a regression. So we have steps back. And this is why it's so important to provide this knowledge and to have this as a resource for us as parliamentarians, as politicians, to continue the fight for access to contraception. Because I think when we talk about sexual and reproductive health and rights, we need to see the full picture. Obviously, the access to abortion is a very important part of it. It is also probably the part that is facing most attacks right now. And this sometimes brings a little bit the focus away from the other very important areas, of which contraception obviously is one. So I'm very happy, very pleased for being able to host this event and to find out more about the situation in Europe when it comes to contraception. And having said this, I will pass the floor back to my colleague Sophie Infeld, who I believe will then also guide you through the first part of the event.
Thank you very much. And thank you for hosting this together with me and for all your efforts for sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I would like to echo your words and echo the message of the Contraception Atlas. I don't want to be alarmist or over dramatize, but I do think that we are facing a full-blown global attack on women's rights and women's autonomy. And I think we are being too naive about it. We tend to think that it is, this is only a passing period where some populists may be in power, but they will go away again, or it's only in isolated cases. And I think if you look at, and here I'm sharing some of my frustration, if you look at the turnout at elections of young people and women, they are systematically voting less than men and elderly people. But it's young people and women in particular who have an interest in having, more progressive, or these days I would simply say sane and decent people in power. So that is something I think we need to look at. Secondly, if you look at the global efforts to roll back all the achievements in terms of sexual and reproductive health and rights and the money that is channeled into it. I mean, we recently saw this report that showed that, let's say, these ultra-religious American evangelicals are pouring almost $300 million into a global campaign against women's rights, against LGBTI rights, and 1/3 of that is being spent in Europe. In the European Union, it's being spent on campaigns inside the EU institutions. It's being spent on litigation before the European courts. And that means that these anti-choice forces, they know how to play the system. They are playing the system. And then I see, how the progressive, mainstream, centrist, moderate, decent forces are, they think that the debate is still national. So I'm really feeling, if I look what's happening in the United States, but also here in Poland, in Hungary, and don't have the illusion that it will be limited to those countries, then I really think that we have to step up our efforts. And people like Terry and myself will keep doing that. EPF is doing a magnificent job. There are many NGOs out there who are doing a great job, but we need to do even better, I think. And I think the Contraceptives Atlas of this year is going to once again provide us with excellent material for doing that campaign. So having said that, Terry said, I'm going to guide you through the program. I have to guide myself through the program a little bit as well, because it's quite complicated, but I believe we are now going to go to the interactive poll, and it will be presented by Sarah Betson, if I'm not mistaken. Sarah, you have the floor.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Honourable Interveld. So just before we reveal the findings of the 2020 Contraception Atlas, we wanted to test everybody's knowledge first. So I'm going to launch now the small interactive poll. If you go to the bottom panel of your Zoom, then you could see the poll icon there. And there are just 5 questions that we wanted to pose to you before we get started. So the first question is, what percentage of women of reproductive age use contraception in Europe? There are 4 different answers to choose from there, and then we'll see your answers coming in. The panelists can also vote if you want to. The second question is, what percentage of pregnancies in Europe are unintended? And then the third question is, what are the most effective contraceptives avoiding pregnancy? This one is a multiple choice question, so there's 2 correct answers actually. Then number 4 is, out of the 46 countries that we ranked in the Contraception Atlas, how many do you think reimburse different types of modern contraception, including at least one long-acting reversible contraceptive? Those are the most effective. And then finally, we're interested to know which country you think ranks in first place in the 2020 Atlas. So I can see some answers coming in. So the majority of people think that 56% of women of reproductive age use contraception in Europe, and I can reveal that that is correct. So the number has been increasing in the past 30 years, but we still think that it's far too low, that more women in Europe should have more access to contraceptives, and that would mean that the answer to the second question, in terms of the number of unintended pregnancies, would decline with more contraceptive use. So you've answered that 35% of pregnancies in Europe are unintended, so that's also correct. So you do know your stuff. And then for the third question, also correct. So the implant and the IUD are these long-acting reversible contraceptives. They are more than 99% effective at avoiding pregnancy. So those are the ones that that are most effective and women are most happy with usually, but they're also the ones that have most barriers in terms of financial and some stigma as well. And then for question number 4, also correct, out of 46 countries, only 17 are currently reimbursing different types of modern contraception, including at least one LARC. And then finally, you think that Belgium ranks in first place in the 2020 Atlas. And I'm not going to tell you whether you're right yet. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Neil, who will present the findings. So thank you very much.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Neil Datta. I'm the Secretary of the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. And thank you very much for such a nice welcome, Sophie and Terry. It's great to be with you again for this 4th edition. Normally, we would be in the European Parliament and we'd all be listening to this and savoring some contraceptive-themed chocolates as we have in the past years. But it's nice to know that at least we can still draw a crowd without the prospect of chocolates to discuss this issue. So that's a nice surprise. So I have a little presentation on this year's finding. Next slide, please. So first, why do we do a contraception atlas? So again, this, as we saw from my colleague Sarah with a little warm up with the poll, there's still a great deal to be done in Europe. So it's more than 1/3 of pregnancies in Europe which are still unintended. So more than 1/3. And it's less than 60% of women in Europe who use contraception. So there's still quite a bit of work to be done. The numbers have evolved over previous editions. These are the most updated numbers of earlier this year that were published in the Lancet. Next slide, please. So in terms of, so also why a contraception atlas? As Terry was saying earlier, many people think that contraception in Europe has been resolved a number of decades ago. Well, that's only in part true. It's good to remember a few key facts about contraception. First, increased use of effective contraception leads to fewer unintended pregnancies. Then, fewer unintended pregnancies leads to fewer induced abortions. Europe has both among the highest contraceptive prevalence rates in the world and among the lowest abortion rates in the world. So we're already doing quite well compared to other geographic regions. And also we've done some good progress. Europe has both the most decrease in unintended pregnancies, -47% compared to more than 25 years ago, and also the most decrease in induced abortions, less 63% in the world. And that's mainly due in terms of fewer abortions to the progress that's been done in Eastern European countries, where if you remember back in the early 1990s, abortion was used as a fertility control method in many East European countries. So we've done a lot of progress, but that progress is very uneven. Next slide, please. So in terms of some areas where we can see some general trends in Europe and where there's room for improvement is in terms of the effectiveness of contraception reimbursement policies and effectively meeting women's choices. One reason, or one area to really take a look at are the reimbursement schemes and whether they are adequate for today's new generation of contraceptive technologies. A lot of the reimbursement schemes date from a couple of decades ago and may not have evolved to catch up with the emerging technologies. And also to bridge the disconnect between the preferred method of contraception and public authorities' funding priorities, so that there's a better adaptation of reimbursement policies to meet what women would actually like to use. And in here, again, I'd like to emphasize the unique advantages of long-acting reversible contraception, where they're, on the one hand, the most effective, but also because they are a one-off cost, they may not be accessible to the women who need them the most. And finally, investing in contraception is also a wise economic decision. For every dollar or euro spent on contraception, and specifically long-acting reversible contraception, there is a saving to the public coffers, a 1 to 5 saving, in fact. Next slide, please. So here, what is the Atlas? The Atlas is an interactive online map that looks at all of geographic Europe, so not just the EU, but all 46 countries, and it focuses on 3 areas: access to supplies, access to counseling, and also availability of online information. Just to note here, it does not take a look at contraceptive prevalence rates. And then we've divided these up into 5 criteria with sub-criteria. For those of you who are really interested into the details of this, once you get the atlas, you can find the specific criteria either on the poster itself or online on the website. Next slide, please. So if we take a look at some of the what it is that we're looking at in terms of supplies and counseling, you can see that we've graded countries according to the 6-color scheme, where with the bright green, you have a general reimbursement scheme for contraceptives. Young people are covered, low-income women or vulnerable women of some sort, and you have free counseling for family planning. Then you get into the lighter green, it's not quite as good. And then you go all the way to the dark red, where you, in some cases, you need a third-party consent in order to access contraception. You may not have emergency contraception without a prescription. And then you have different gradations in between those two extremes. Next slide, please. And then in terms of online information, we thought it was very important also to take a look at what information is out there about contraception, bearing in mind that in some countries, there's a lot of stigma and myths surrounding contraception, so that in some countries, you may be able to find an average person who thinks that contraception will make women hairy or will make them sterile or etc. And so it's important that there's authoritative information that is provided about what is and is not contraception. And so there we scored very positively those countries that have a government-supported website with good information on contraception. And then you have all the way to the extreme, no information provided by public authorities or even civil society actors. Next slide, please. So first, in terms of findings this year compared to last year, we have a number of very positive national policy changes. So already it was referred to in the little clip we showed at the beginning, but good changes from Belgium. Bulgaria reimburses contraception, specifically IUDs under the health insurance fund. Finland now is moving towards having municipalities offer contraception free to young people. Iceland reduced VAT. North Macedonia also free contraceptives for vulnerable women in some hospitals in Skopje. And also the Netherlands, a new Ministry of Health program of contraception for vulnerable groups. And also in Spain started reimbursing the contraception ring. So you can see there's a very good positive direction across many countries in Europe. And this is across both north, south, east, and west. Next slide, please. And also at European level, that's very important. There's been some very good developments. And also bearing in mind that these are, non-binding, they won't have a direct effect, but they do have the benefit of setting the general tone for where countries and member states should be going. And there's been very important progress at both the Council of Europe and at the European Parliament level, where there's a report on promoting access to contraception. We'll be hearing about that a bit later, and also on an agenda for gender equality. And then here in the European Parliament, as many people know, there's ongoing work on a draft report on sexual reproductive health and rights being worked on by your colleague, Fred Matic. And then also soon to be adopted, hopefully, draft resolution on 25-year anniversary of the ICPD Nairobi Summit. So that should be coming forth very, very shortly. So you can see at both levels of pan-European decision-making, very good directions taking place. Next slide. Also, some positive developments in terms of contraceptive information, in terms of online information. So you can see positive developments in Georgia and Moldova, mainly coming from non-state actors, but also state actors such as the Luxembourg National Center for Promotion of Educational and Sexual Well-being, did a new website about contraception following our guidelines. So we can see overall, there's much better information about contraception, mainly due to non-state actors around Europe. But the situation now compared to 4 years ago is very much improved. Next slide. And then overall, we're almost at the map. So overall, in terms of key findings, we have 8 countries this year in the champion category. We have 10 countries who are in the very good category. We have 11 countries in the medium category, but you can see among the medium category, that's where we have quite a few improvements from what had been previously poor countries, poor category countries. Also, we still have 9 countries in the poor category, But again, 2 of these are an improvement from very poor. Unfortunately, we have 7 countries in very poor. Those remain unchanged. And we have 1 that is exceptionally poor, where we even had to come up with a new color for that. And that country is Poland. And also, I'll just remind you, many of you are familiar with what's the debate taking place now in Poland about access to abortion. And just remember what I presented earlier. Contraception helps reduce unintended pregnancies, and if you reduce unintended pregnancies, you reduce the need for induced abortion. And so Poland is doing bad in all levels here, both in terms of abortion with the law, and then also in terms of reducing unintended pregnancies. Next slide, please. And so, tada, here's the map here's the contraception atlas that we've been for this year. So I'll give you a moment to take a look at this, but you can see there's a clear divide in Europe. Western Europe is broadly green and has been getting deeper green over the past few years. Sweden is now in the category of very good, of exceptionally good. And then you can see improvements across a big band of Southern and Eastern Europe. So that now there's fewer countries in the red category as there were a number of years ago. But we still, and you take a look at the South Caucasus, now they've all graduated to orange. So, broadly speaking, there's been a positive evolution here, but we still have 1 country that stands out, and unfortunately, that's Poland for the reasons I've just mentioned. So next slide, please. Yes, so some key conclusions, okay? So here, Belgium is a clear European champion. It takes the lead for the first time in 4 years. Last year, we had Belgium and France as a joint lead, but now Belgium edges out in front of France. We have 7 countries which have introduced policies related to supplies and counseling, and 4 countries improved online resources. And overall, we have a positive progression across most of Europe, and especially visible in Western and Southern Europe. On the negative side, we have Poland is still the clear loser. It's the only country which has increased restrictions on contraception in recent years. If we zoom in on the European Union, we have a number of member states who are still among the 10 worst performing countries in Europe. And those are Czech Republic, Lithuania, Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland. And access to modern contraception, access to modern and effective contraception, and especially affordable contraception, still remains a challenge even within the European Union, where there's no excuse for this to continue this way. Next slide, please. And here, this is the same slide I showed earlier, but really just to bring home the message that effective contraception contributes to fewer unintended pregnancies, which then leads to fewer induced abortions. And we've done very well as a European region in the past, but there's still a lot of progress. That progress has been uneven, as you've seen, and it's essentially a question of political will. We're not waiting for a COVID vaccine. We have all the contraception technologies that we need. It's really simply a question of political will in different countries, whether something can be done or not. So I'll end here. So next slide, please. So I'll end here with thank you to those who made this possible, to the expert group who've really guided us, to the different national partners and experts who've double checked and verified everything, to MSD and to the Global Innovation Center, and also to the many parliamentarians and civil society actors who have contributed to this success, not only by hosting such events as this, but really championing the cause in their political work. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neil. I'm looking for the clapping hands on screen and thumbs up, but I can't find it. So I'll just have to do it like this. Thank you very much. Great work, great presentation, as always. I believe we have a series of speakers now. Terry, I believe you're going to introduce the speakers.
Sure, thanks. And I just want to show off that I had all the questions right. I didn't expect myself to be so informed. It's mostly due to the efforts of EPF and a lot of other great civil society actors who have provided us with all this data, so that over time, you know, you get an idea of it. As Sophie said, we have now a great list of speakers, and I think the idea was a little bit to look at the champion, which is Belgium on the one side, and then, I mean, the loser or the least ranking country, Poland, on the other side, the challenges that are there, and then in the end to have it brought together. So I'm going to go through the speakers one by one. The first one is going to be Ms. Karin Layeux. She is the Belgian Federal Minister on Pension, Social Integration, Poverty, Alleviation and Disabled People. I hope I said everything correctly. And she was a parliamentarian previously who fought a lot for SRHR and pushed for legislative changes. And this basically is now paying off with being the champion on the Atlas. Unfortunately, she cannot be with us today because she has to be in Parliament, but we are really happy to have a video message, and I would say roll the clip.
Bonjour, c'est avec beaucoup de fierté que j'ai découvert que la Belgique occupe la première place devant tous les autres pays européens en ce qui concerne l'accès à la contraception pour les filles et pour les femmes. C'est notamment grâce au travail que j'ai mené avec mes autres collègues du Parlement belge en faveur du remboursement des moyens de contraception. Aujourd'hui, en Belgique, et nous en sommes très fiers, la contraception est gratuite pour toutes les jeunes filles de moins de 25 ans. Et la pilule du lendemain est gratuite quel que soit l'âge de la fille ou de la jeune femme. La contraception est évidemment un élément essentiel des droits des femmes à disposer de leur propre corps. Cela permet un droit à une sexualité épanouie, surtout parce qu'elle permet de distinguer sexualité et reproduction. Comme ministre de l'intégration sociale, de la lutte contre la pauvreté et de la personne handicapée, j'accorde également une attention très particulière à l'accessibilité de tous les types de contraception pour les populations, les filles, les femmes les plus vulnérables. Nous devons travailler d'arrache-pied avec l'ensemble des associations de terrain pour trouver le moyen pour que chaque fille, chaque femme soit à l'abri, quelle que soit sa situation de vie. Et là, nous devons encore travailler sur le terrain. Par ailleurs, nous devons encore renforcer l'éducation sexuelle au sein de notre école et casser ainsi beaucoup de tabous autour de la sexualité, mais aussi autour de la contraception. Nous pouvons être fiers, nous les Belges, de cette première place, mais je vous dis, et je leur dis, et je nous dis, surtout, on ne doit pas se reposer sur nos lauriers. Les combats sont encore utiles et les combats sont encore longs. J'espère qu'on servira d'exemple à de nombreux autres pays, parce que c'est une nécessité pour l'épanouissement et pour l'égalité entre les hommes et les femmes. Et sachez que je serai toujours à vos côtés pour des combats pour les droits sexuels et reproductifs des femmes du monde entier. Bonjour.
Okay, sorry. I just thought maybe there was something else coming, but I think this was the video. Thanks very much to the minister to send this video message and also to tell us a little bit how Belgium came so far that now they're ranking on the top of the Atlas and how they have fought for it. And how maybe they can also serve as a best practice or an example for other countries where things might look a little bit grimmer. And talking about that, we come to the situation in Poland, where, as you could see already in the second year, Poland is ranking at the bottom of the list. Actually, things are worsening as we speak, not only when it comes to access to contraception, but also access to information about contraception, specifically sexuality education in schools. There are very heavy attacks also on the right to abortion in Poland. And I believe there is no better person who can give us insight about the situation than Antonina Lewandowska. She is from the Astra network, from the organization Federa. It's the biggest network for sexual and reproductive rights in Central and Eastern Europe. And she's a sex educator herself and a consultant for sexual abuse at the University of Warsaw, but also has an activist background. She has been following very, very closely the situation in Poland, and she can give us an insight about what is happening in Poland currently, but hopefully also what are maybe possibilities to turn around this trend that we have been seeing and to increase the access to contraception, to sexuality education, and to sexual and reproductive health and rights as a whole in Poland. Antonina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Terry, and welcome everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a great honor, although quite grim circumstances, but I'm really happy to explain what is going on in Poland. So as you can imagine, it's a very complicated situation that has a lot of factors that play an important role in what is currently going on in Poland. We obviously have the political situation and current government, which is strongly against sexual and reproductive health and rights. But there is also much more. So let me just list the most important factors. So the first one is the fact that Poland dedicates one of the lowest percentages of GDP for medical services in Europe. That means that our national health fund is highly underfinanced, and that obviously causes issues. Most of medical professionals either leave abroad to search for better circumstances for work and life, or they open private practices and are really reluctant to work within the National Health Fund. So that's one thing. Access to the services is also very scarce. We know that in some regions of the country, even 70% of municipalities do not have access to gynecological examination rooms or practices. So most women, especially those living in rural areas, are simply unable to get help in their nearest neighborhood, and that means that they would have to travel to the nearest either big city or even different voivodeship in order to access medical care. Except from these two factors, we also have the third one, which is the non-existent access to theoretically refunded procedures. For example, insertion of IUD in theory should be refunded by the state. And the situation is, and we know it for a fact because Federa assists women who are struggling to have the procedure done within National Health Fund, is that medical professionals deny inserting the IUD in national practices and would rather direct a woman to their private practice when they can charge even 400 euros for inserting the IUD, which is specifically hard for Polish women, while the median of income in Poland is around 700 to 800 euros. So as you can see, even the insertion of an IUD can cost you half of what you earn in a month. And it's bizarre, it's absurd, and it's just one of the many issues that women face in order to access their basic reproductive rights. There is also an issue, it's a legal gap. It's a very serious one. I know it, especially as a sex educator. I work with youth. And to give you a bit of a background in our local situation is in Poland, the age of consent is 15. But a woman can only go to a medical professional by herself when she's 18. So that means that we have a 3 years gap when a teenager can legally have sex, but cannot access contraception in any other form than condoms. And that causes huge problems when it comes to what do we call internally, we call it so-called pregnancy paranoia, because it leads to teenagers being terrified of the option of getting pregnant. It takes a tremendous toll on the quality of their sexual life, on mental health. So that's another one. We have one of the lowest birth rates in Europe due to all of that. We do not have access to contraception. We do not have access to legal abortion. And it leads people to be so terrified of the idea of starting a family, then they decide to not have children at all. Our several governments tried to somehow address the issue, but it never occurred to them that maybe investing in access to contraception and National Health Fund could be an answer to that. So that's one thing that I wanted to say. We, however, do have a ray of light in this grim situation, which is just today, actually, it was announced that we have, and I'm sorry, I have to read from a paper because it's a legal term, so I'm sorry for that, but it was just announced that we have a legislative initiative for a liberalization of abortion law, sexuality education, and access to contraception in Poland. It's currently formed by both parliamentarians from the opposition, usually from the left or from the so-called civic coalition, but also numerous representatives of NGOs, including FEDERA, or Federation for Women and Family Planning. So there are currently numerous attempts undertaken by both the parliamentarians and the civil society to change this situation that we are currently facing. Except from that, the civil society also works with opposition in many different ways. We cooperate while organizing protests or writing petitions, etc. So advocacy on the national level, but also international. Just the fact that I am being here with you, again, thank you, is an opportunity for us to shed a bit of light on the local situation. And we do our best to educate society, both in terms of access to sexual and reproductive rights for adults, but also for youth. And the last thing that I'm going to mention is quality of sex education, which is actually one of the worst in Europe. Sexuality education is a non-obligatory subject in schools. Most of the students do not attend the classes at all. Almost, or even over, I think it's over 10% of the classes is conducted by either priests or nuns. And most of the teachers are not prepared to conduct the classes. And there is a huge issue. After the Law and Justice came to power in 2015 and 2016, the curriculum for sexuality education was changed. And now contraception is there is an opposition created. When you read the document, the new curriculum, they say that the student has to know about the so-called NAPRO technology, so natural procreation technology, which is a partially pseudoscientific method of observation of the body, etc. So it can lead, in theory, to getting pregnant for couples who are struggling, but only if the issue comes with some form of small issue regarding the menstrual cycle. Any other intervention, surgical, etc., is out of the question when it comes to NAPRO technology. So NAPRO technology is juxtaposed against, and it says contraception, sterilization, and abortion. So there is this opposition created by the ruling party and by politicians that causes tremendous stigma to be created around contraception. Many people still believe that you can get either sterile or hairy, as Neil mentioned before. Contraception is a bit of a scare, especially for teenagers that are denied access to proper sexuality education, who cannot access practice or the National Health Fund offices, and therefore they are usually driven to go to private practice if they can afford it. And on top of that, you have to get a prescription in order to obtain the morning after pill. And again, a teenager cannot go by themselves to the medical professional, so they have to bring their parents. And as you can imagine, it forces them to say, hey, mom, or hey, dad, I had unprotected sex and I need you to accompany me to a medical professional. It's virtually impossible to get into a medical office, the national medical office, on the next day. You usually have to wait at least a few weeks. So again, people have to reach out to private practices and pay around 50 euros for the visit itself, and then another 50 for the pill, sometimes 30, depends on the pharmacy. So the costs are huge, access is non-existent, and we are still fighting for better access for contraception. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Antonina. I think Sophie's clapping. I can only support this clapping to the great work that you are doing, both in terms of spreading knowledge, but also really on the ground. And maybe just to share with you one very small anecdote. 3 years ago, we had a European Parliament delegation from the FAM committee going to Poland. We also met with representatives from the Health Ministry and the Family Ministry, obviously only men. We were 4 women. And I think it was the Deputy Health Minister who actually said into our faces that the only okay way for a Catholic woman to use contraception was the ovulation method, as you were also explaining. And I mean, the really ironic thing about this situation was that there were 4 Catholic women sitting in front of him who had all been using different forms of contraception. So I think this really shows in what a political situation Poland is with this ruling party. And I can only say again that I think it's great that you are still keeping up this good work, even with the political pressure that you have also been facing over the past years. Now, you will have the chance to ask questions to Antonina, but before we go into the questions and answers round, last but not least, we have a third great speaker, Petra Bayer. She's a member of the parliament in Austria, and she's also the chairperson of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And there she was the rapporteur for the resolution that Neil had just previously presented, dealing with the question of access to contraception in Europe. And she's also EPF's interim president, and she's going to give you insight about the challenges that she has been facing pushing forward this resolution, but maybe also the positive developments that we can see in Europe. Petra, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Very an idea of the.
I think you were gone for a little bit. At least I couldn't hear you. Go again.
Okay, I'll try again. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, now it's good.
My screen tells me that my internet connection is unstable, so I hope we will make it. I will start with a brief introduction, or tell you in a nutshell what's the content of the report, which I worked on last year and which was adopted in June this year, only against 1 vote, so quite broad supported. It's dealing more or less with the access to modern contraceptives. And in my introduction, I say that if you as a woman have access to contraceptives, then this also helps you for your empowerment, for your decision-making power, and also for your autonomy, both within the family and in the society, because you much easier can balance your job and your family if you can plan the size and when you want to have a big family or small family or no family or whatever family. It also deals with equal access to contraceptives regardless of geography, and whether you are living in a remote or rural area or in an urban setting. It also the access should also be regardless of your economic and financial situation, which makes it so important that you have some reimbursement schemes, either covered by the state or covered by the health insurance. And it also should be an equal access regardless of age and social surrounding. So it means also that, as we already heard from the Polish situation, that we really need a health care system and a sexual, that of course includes sexual and reproductive health, that is open for everybody, regardless of age or whatever. So it has to be really open and easy to access. When we talk about contraceptives, we also have to be aware that we have to overcome cultural and social barriers, including cultural norms, including gender stereotypes, prejudices, and moral stigmas, which women who are using contraceptives very often have to face. We have especially consider how we make it possible that also vulnerable and marginalized women and also men, because contraceptives is not only for women, of course, it's also for men in some cases, but everybody really should have access to that. It has to be gender appropriate, so you also have to look especially on LGBTIQ people, what needs do they have because of their real physical needs. Contraceptives must fit with gender. I also think that it's very important to have access to emergency contraceptives without prescription, because any prescription just delays the access to it, and it isn't helpful, it isn't healthy as well. What of course is also very crucial, and what also should come first, is the knowledge of what contraceptives are available, how do I get it, and how do I use it, because very often there is some misinformation about that. So the information should be accessible in schools and in the whole, whenever you are in the education system, it should be age adequate, that you are taught how to perform sexuality at all, and how you take responsibility for yourselves and for others. So that's of course also a part of the report, such as also to keep in mind that sometimes maybe migrants or people with ethnico-linguistic minorities could have problems to have access to contraceptives. So you must not forget about them. Yeah, and the general conclusion is more or less that sexual and reproductive rights have to be very high on your political agenda, have to have priority, and especially, and we had also an addendum to this report because it was ready by December last year and we adopted it in June because of Corona. And so we also made an addendum that on the one hand, we learned that the COVID situation in some countries made it easier for women to have access, but in others it did not at all. But we should keep those possibilities, for instance, to get easier a prescription than you had it before, because you were not allowed to leave your house and not allowed to visit a doctor. So prescriptions also could given and electronically. All that what we gained, we really should maintain and we really should keep, because it works obviously. And but we also should be prepared for crisis in those settings and situations where it did not work very well. So we have to keep in mind that. And I mentioned schools before, but we also shouldn't forget about the fact that there is also a lack of knowledge among adult people. And so also this one a layer of the contraceptive atlas when it comes to information on the internet is so crucial, because we do not have to consider that only the youngs are those without knowledge. It's often also the adults who need it, also age appropriate, of course. Yeah, and as I already mentioned, even if the report was voted nearly unanimously, we had of course some debates in advance, because there is also in the Council of Europe some backlash and some backwards looking movements. For instance, I had to debate that sexuality education, some thought, is only something for parents. There is nothing that there is no space for it at schools.
Now it was going really well. Now you're back, I think.
Okay.
But we had a little bit, you were ending with sexuality education is only something for parents, and then you maybe can start again from there.
Okay, so I wanted to come to the situation what happened in advance before we adopted the report, and it is clear that we have backlash also in the Council of Europe, in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. For instance, some countries argued that sexuality education is nothing for the school. It should be the obligation of parents only, and we really demand that it's binding, that you do not have the chance as a parent to say, okay, my kid is not, she or he shouldn't attend sexuality education at school. So it really should be compulsory for everybody. There was some opposition against that. There were also people who said if we ask for age appropriate sexuality education from the very beginning, then that it means that kids in kindergartens will be forced to masturbate. No, of course not. That's not the idea behind age adequate sexuality education. And when it came to contraceptives, we also had an informal side event at the Parliamentary Assembly, where one delegate had a discussion where there came arguments like contraceptives are not secure at all, but beside that, if a woman uses contraceptives, then she becomes a sex object. Because if she will not become pregnant after every sexual intercourse, everybody can sleep with her, and so she's a sex object at the end. And there also came some really crazy arguments like, if you use contraceptives which are based on hormones, then the choice movement, of course, also is at the Council of Europe and the Parliamentary Assembly there. But nevertheless, we made it. The report was adopted. And I think it's really important, and that's the much more important work now to deal with it, to use it, to work with it, to follow up Contraceptive Atlas, which gives you very good evidence, figures, knowledge about what's going on. I think that the report, on the other hand, can give you very good political arguments that you can use for how to improve access to SRHR in general and contraceptives in particular. And I just wanted to invite all of you. I don't know exactly who is watching and who has joined us today, but if you also fight for sexual and reproductive rights in your countries, and if you also feel the backlash, which is often comes together with I wouldn't like, some countries as Poland as well, would like to get off from the Istanbul Convention because they say violence against women is something that should be decided in families and it's not up to the state. Or if you feel that the rights of LGBTIQ people are totally under pressure, that often comes together with opposition to sexual and reproductive health and rights in connection with contraceptives in general. And if you want to engage with a pro-choice movement, and if you are a member of parliament on what level ever, then we really would appreciate if you could become member of the European Parliamentary Forum on Sexual and Reproductive Rights, so that we can combine our forces and that we can fight together for giving this strong political priority to SRHR. So I really would like to invite you, follow us on our website, come there and let's try to make things better all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Petra. There were 2 or 3 other maybe a little bit cutting moments, but I think it was okay. And thanks a lot for your great work, all the energy that you put into this, and now describing it. My colleague Sophie Infeld commented in the chat, and she only sent it to the panelists. That's why I'm going to read it out. You'd think that the anti-choice dinosaurs would have come up with some original new arguments, but they're still using the same fake stories they did back in the Stone Age. And I think I can only support that from what you have been telling us. That is obviously still what they're doing. Now it's 3. We want to move to a more interactive part where you can ask questions. And we have this question and answer tool that you can see in the handle down below, where you can type your questions. And while you are doing this, we will take some 5 minutes to watch a promotional video from EPF. And then we hope that we have some questions and we can bring it back to our speakers. Thanks. Okay, I think that was it. Thanks a lot. I can see, I don't know if it's a problem with the question and answer tool. I hope that everybody knows how to use it, that you have access to it, but we don't have any questions yet from participants. But I actually would have a question that I would like to pose to all of our speakers, also including Neil. Petra has been showing her leadership that she has been pushing for in the Parliamentary Assembly in the Council of Europe. Now, I would like to know a little bit your assessment from the EU level, also from the Council of Europe level, from different political international actors, what you think more can be done in terms of fighting for better access to contraception. Just maybe to give you one entry point, one of the things that we have been thinking about is to adding this much stronger to the health strategy of the European Union. I mean, we don't have a direct competence in the field of health, but we do have certain tools that we can use on an EU level, at least, in order to push for certain issues, including sexual and reproductive health and rights, and they're obviously also including contraception. I mean, the country that is at the moment most problematic is inside of the European Union even. And maybe you would like to say what you think about this, but also what you think could be additional tools on the EU level, also on the Council of Europe level, that we can use to push for better access. Maybe I go again, starting with Neil, and then we go to Antonina and then back to Petra.
Thank you very much, Thierry. That's an excellent question. Just some initial thoughts based on what you've raised. I think definitely there's a lot of room for improvement at EU level and also at pan-European level, including reference to contraception within the limits of what is the EU competence in the EU health, in forthcoming EU health strategies. That would be very useful. And I think aside from having a direct competence in a certain area, the EU does set the tone and the guidance for which direction member states should be following. And it can do this. Also, it can promote exchanges of good practice between member states, and it should be doing this. Perhaps another area to be looking at, and that's one area which is new for the EU, is that of demography. As you know, now we have a new commissioner in charge of democracy and demography. Demography has been used in the past by certain governments as an entry point to undermine women's rights to make their own choices. Saying that my country is undergoing demographic decline, we need to boost our native population, and by doing this, we will reduce access to abortion, and also we want to promote population growth, and this means reducing access to contraception and ways for women to control their fertility because we want more babies. Okay, some governments have been doing this, and a champion on this issue has been the government of Hungary under Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who's organized international summits on this. I think really understanding properly what demography is about, and if you take a look at the contraception atlas at the map of Europe, what you can see is that the countries that are doing well in terms of providing access to contraception are those which have a relatively good population growth rate. It's more or less at replacement level, not quite, but it's doing relatively well. The countries which are experiencing real demographic decline, and aside from the nativist populist reasons for why this is a concern, there is a legitimate concern about what does this mean for social policies. You know, if your population is declining by 5-10% on a certain basis, what does this mean 30 years from now? So there's real concerns there. Those countries are also the ones who are performing the worst in terms of access to contraception. So I think we need to have a mind shift there in terms of considering contraception, not just as a way for women to limit the pregnancies that they don't want, but it's a proactive way over the long term to allow women and their families and their loved ones to have the number of children and to have the families that they actually want to have, and making sure that, and contraception is a part of that. And by meeting the unmet need in terms of contraception, we can help women in many countries have the number of children and families that they would like. So I think perhaps having the contraception discussion enter the discussion on demography would be useful, and not leave the terrain open to nativists and populists who have other intentions in mind.
Thanks, Neil. Before I give the floor to Antonina, we had another question coming in from Kasia, saying that I live between Sweden and Poland, where I'm also active in a grassroots movement helping Polish women to access to contraception. I'm deeply worried about the situation in Poland, and I would like to know what the EP can do in order to take the burden of responsibility from ordinary EU citizens and organizations. Setting the tone is not enough. Maybe this is also the question that I can then, after Antonina and Petra have answered, pass on to my colleague Sophia. Maybe I can also say a couple of words about it. But first, I would like to give the floor now to Antonina, maybe looking at both questions a little bit.
Well, yeah, thank you. I think I can only agree with what Neil said, but I would also like to point to the fact that we should stress the issue or the matter of self-agency and how contraception allows a person to be a fully independent individual. It's not only about limiting pregnancies, it's not only about human rights. We do know what is going around that discuss regarding human rights, how the discussion is changing, who is hijacking our terms, basically. So I think that we should really stress that access to contraception and family planning services in general is a matter of self-agency and of boosting the demographics. It's something that we are trying to do in Poland, actually. As I said, we have one of the lowest birth rates. And I do believe that improving access to family planning services would play a great role in raising the birth rate. So that's one thing. And the second is, I think we should focus and stress the need for addressing family planning services, not only in recommendations, but also, if possible, in resolutions and legal documents. There is a lot that we say about the rule of law, the rule of democracy, what role it plays within the European Union. I do believe that we should treat access to sexual and reproductive services as a lakmus paper, let's say, for testing the freedom of an individual and freedom of citizens. So that could be something that may be worth looking for. And regarding specific actions, I believe that European Parliament is a body with, well, what can we say, limited possibilities for undertaking specific actions. But I think that, as Neil mentioned, it's a great platform for networking. So I believe creating such networks and grassroots movements, helping each other out in specific countries while meeting on the platform of European Parliament could be amazing. And thank you, Kasia, for what you're doing. We do know that we are in contact with Swedish citizens. There is a great wave of support coming from Scandinavia in general, from Scandinavian countries. So this is something that what I would be looking for as a short-term solution to our current situation in Poland, as this support is needed urgently now. And a long-term game, which would be, sorting out this whole messed up situation, is another step that we need to focus on, especially with stressing the self-agency and the need for access to reproductive services when it comes to European demographics.
Thanks a lot, Antonina. Petra?
Yeah. Maybe to bring it a little bit in a kind of systematic, I think there are different layers how we can argue and where we can politically enter this issue. Neil already mentioned the demographic dimension. You, Terry, already mentioned the medical dimension, and to add something on the medical dimension, I'm also active globally in development cooperation, and there we very often speak about universal health coverage. That means that really everybody everywhere has access to basic health care, that your needs are really met, and that also goes hand in hand with better social protection floors, with a universal better involvement of people in a society that also takes care in precarious situations, and to have always to bear in mind that sexual and reproductive health is part of health. It's in everybody, really, in the body inside, and also, of course, psychologically. But I think it's important to really be in mind that sexual and reproductive needs are there always, even in refugee settings, always. Yeah. So we have to bear in mind when we come to planning healthcare centers or healthcare programs in development cooperation, we really should always think about that. And I think that the third layer is this layer of empowerment, of self-determination, which Antonia also mentioned. And there, I think it's so important that to bear in mind that not to have access to contraceptives, for instance, or to education in this regard, it is also a kind of structural violence. And this violence, or every violence, is usually the output of unbalanced power situations. So that means in general, it's important to work on that women have more power, economic power, social power, cultural power, what power ever, then it's easier for us to fight these imbalances and to have better access to means in general, also to medical means, and also to human rights, because this access and this balanced powers is a question of basic human rights in the very end. And I think we should use this context as well when we argue politically for easier access to SRHI in general. I do not want to bring it down to contraceptives only.
Thanks a lot, Petra. Now I would give the floor, if she wants to say something, to Sophie, maybe to answer the question on the parliament. Then I still have one question for Antonina, and then we already have to move a little bit to closing remarks. Sophie?
Yes, thank you. First of all, on the shrinking and aging population in the countries who are doing worst on the contraception map, that's absolutely right. They also happen to be the countries who worry about immigration, whereas the real problem, demographic problem they have, is emigration. So everything they're doing is the wrong way around. And maybe because we have now, I had actually completely forgotten about it, but we have a European commissioner in charge of demography. I'm not entirely sure if she's on the same wavelength as we are, but what would be interesting is if Terry and I write a written parliamentary question, including two maps, the contraception map and the map of demographic decline, and send them to the commissioner and ask her if she wouldn't think it's a good idea to give a boost to the use of contraceptives, contraception in order to boost population growth. Secondly, what can the European Parliament do? Look, the Parliament cannot charge in with the cavalry. Okay, sometimes people have really unrealistic expectations of what politics in general can do. But we're also a little bit more than just a platform for exchange. And of course, and here I have to share again a little bit of my frustration, because it's very easy for all of us who are logged into this meeting to agree, you know, but we are a little bit our own echo chamber. If we want to achieve change, we have to use all the instruments that we have to get power. And there I would repeat what I said at the start. I'm very frustrated, increasingly frustrated, to see how, let's say, the progressive forces, if I may label us that way, how we are extremely reluctant to address the issue of how the governance structures in the European Union favor the populist forces. I mean, give another example. Look across the big pond and see how the electoral system and the governance system is favoring an autocrat, somebody who's maybe even about to be involved in a power grab. It's not only because he has a lot of voters behind him, it's also the system that favors that kind of policies. We have the same problem in the European Union. You cannot dissociate the substance from the power structures. Because of the structures that we have, it's just a lot more difficult to achieve the things that we want to achieve. And why is it so difficult for us progressive forces to name that? Why do I see that there are parties who are on substance on our side, but they are arguing against the strong European Union? The problem we are facing here is that the European Union has almost zero powers to intervene in the member states. Okay, and those powers that we have are barely being used because you go, oh, we don't want to tread on national toes, you know, ooh, national tradition, national culture. National tradition, national culture just being code language for anti-choice and homophobia. And the point is, if we are not willing to fight for a different kind of European Union that has the power to fight for the rights of women all over the European Union, then we just keep having these meetings where we are talking to each other. Sorry, I'm getting very upset, but this is You know, after what Terry said at the very start, this is the fourth, I think it's I don't know, the how many session we are having, and we are turning around in circles. And Neil said, you know, in some places it's getting worse. Now, again, we cannot, of course, there is the democracy. We cannot just overrule people. But the problem is, now we have a system where national minorities in national governments are deciding for the majority in those countries. Because no, the majority of Polish people do not want to suppress women. Okay, it's a minority of, let's face it, white, middle-aged, heterosexual, or at least openly Christian males who want to control women. And we don't have the full toolbox that we need in the European Union. And the final thing I want to say is, at least when we're looking at public health policies, at least now the European Parliament got the message, and I think we're arguing for it. I believe just this week we're going to vote on the Busoy report on health strategies, including sexual and reproductive health and rights. And even for that we had to fight, but I believe that we have a majority, because sexual and reproductive health and rights are part and parcel of public health policies. Why have we accepted for so many years that it was considered something else? It was a big glaring hole. I mean, we talk about European strategies against Alzheimer, obesity, smoking, breast cancer, mental health issues. Why not sexual and reproductive health and rights? Why? Okay, that's just what I wanted to say. Sorry for flying off the handle, but let's. And I think, you know, I'm preaching to the converted, but let's take a new pledge, Terry, that you and I and all the other colleagues, because we are a majority in the European Parliament. You know, we're going to fight for this and not tolerate anymore that this area is treated like something, you know, purely national that we cannot touch. Let's have the courage to say, yes, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and yes, also abortion is also European policies. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sophie. And I think with this strong pledge, this is something that we can take back to our colleagues. But I just wanted to say that, I mean, there is a very big group of members in the European Parliament that are defending exactly these lines. So I think we have hope there that we can really use the Parliament also as a platform. Now, we don't have a lot of time left, but I just wanted to quickly give the floor back to Antonina, because there was a question to you about how challenging it is right now to be a sex educator and consultant in such an unfavorable background for sexual and reproductive health and rights as in Poland, and what approaches from your perspective are most effective dealing with such a difficult situation. Antonina?
Thank you for that. I understand the question is about my personal experience, so that's what I'm going to address. It's tough. It is tough. Both issues, either sexual violence or sexuality education, are seen as highly political or politicized. You may have heard about a bill that's called Stop Pedophilia. It's a virtual ban, and not only a ban, it criminalizes sexuality education. It was currently sent to a parliamentary committee, and it hasn't been discussed yet. Again, there was a voting on it back in April. It was very challenging, because our politicians were discussing whether I should go to prison or not for teaching sexuality education. So that was tough. There is a lot of hostility against activists on the ground. I myself was threatened with a knife on the streets for somebody recognized me from the media. I received threats online, and it's it's challenging. That's for sure. But what I do, what's the strategy? Well, the strategy is just to keep up with the work, not to be broken, not to be bullied into silence, I think would be the best way to put it. Obviously, we take precautions. We do. Our safety is the primary thing that we should focus on. After all, if we are gone, then there is no one to do this, especially in Poland. So we have to take care of ourselves. But I decided to keep my work on different levels at the same time. So I do grassroots work, I do talk to young people, I do talk to women who need support, I do talk to people, for example, the trans community. It's a huge issue in Poland when we are talking about sexual and reproductive rights among the queer community in general. So I do my best to be in touch with them as well, and to explain their rights and to push for that work. But I also do work on the parliamentary level. I'm an expert in several committees, so I advise the policymakers based on my personal experience on the ground. And I do work internationally, like today, when I can present what is actually going on and make recommendations or suggest maybe the way that you can go forward with it. So I think that's my strategy for now, actually. If we are banned from schools, then we go online. If we are banned from online, then we do our best to go from abroad. There was even an idea to conduct sexuality education lessons online with a friend of ours from abroad. So that could be broadcasted from abroad to Poland. So nobody's breaking any laws, and then we could, point young people to that. So it takes a lot of creativity. It takes a lot of elasticity as well, but we do our best to just adjust to the current situation on the ground, to change it, but to keep up our work at the same time.
Thanks a lot. And I can only again bow in front of your courage and the strength that you have and the stamina that you have to keep doing this. And I think it's exactly like you say, we shouldn't be bullied into silence, but quite the opposite. Try every way that we have in order to push for obviously access to contraception, but also all other aspects of sexual and reproductive health and rights. So thank you so much for your work, Antonina, but obviously also to the many others in Poland and other countries that are under a lot of pressure that keep up this good work. We are coming to an end of the launch. I just wanted to wrap up really briefly what I think are maybe takes that we want to look into. First of all, this question, linking it to demography and what we can do there, maybe also looking a little bit at what the commissioner working on demography actually can do to support access to contraception. I think that will be a very interesting debate. Then obviously bringing it fully fledged as part of the health strand. I mean, we see now under the COVID situation that maybe also the reservations they have been to give the European Union more possibilities in health policy have been lifted a little bit. So we actually have a real window of opportunity there to say also sexual and reproductive health and rights are obviously part of that. So we use this window of opportunity also in the struggle for access to contraception and other things. Then I wanted to strengthen again very much this point, make it part of the debate on rule of law and fundamental rights, because it is a fundamental right. And we can see that in countries like Poland, this really goes hand in hand. You have a full-fledged attack on independence of the judiciary, and then the political control of the judiciary is used to undermine sexual and reproductive health and rights. So I think to include it there. And then obviously, and I wanted to end with that, as you know, we are in the end of the negotiations on the MFF. And one of the successes that I think we can see is that there is supposed to be more financial support to human rights defenders, to feminist organizations, to really the civil society on the ground that is doing the hard work also from the European level, because in a lot of the member states where we see these very problematic tendencies, they also cut the funding for the organizations that could jump in, like the Astra network, Federa in Poland, and then to make it easily accessible to get money from the European level. I think this is one of the very crucial things that we have to do so that this amazing work can go on. And then obviously use all the parliamentary networks, all the access to institutions that we have to keep up this very important struggle. So I think we take this for us, for Sophie and me, obviously, to bring this message to the other parliamentarians in the EP, but also for Petra, to keep up her work in the Parliamentary Assembly in the Council of Europe, but obviously also in the Austrian Parliament. for civil society organizations to keep pushing. And for that, for you, potentially what you can do, I mean, sharing the atlas and showing that there still is this situation, making people aware of this, I think is also a first step, raising awareness and then creating more political pressure. And I wanted to finish by making a very quick advertisement block. As you know, we have a network inside of the European Parliament, all of us. We are fighting for sexual and reproductive health and rights, also beyond contraception. And we are currently looking for parliamentarians to support a call for action to act on the very dire situation in Poland with regards to access to abortion. But we could see today that it also goes beyond that. So please, if you can, if you know parliamentarians, we have initiated this together with EPF, make people sign this call. We want to put more pressure on the Commission that they actually act. The Commission has more tools, they could do more. And I think with this plea to you and to all of us, obviously, to keep up this work, I would like to finish. Thank you so much again to all the speakers. To my co-host, wonderful Sophie Infeld, obviously to Neil Data and all the people from EPF who have been working so hard to make this launch of the Contraception Atlas possible, again, for all the work that you are doing, to Antonina, the great work that you are doing in Poland. We know, and now we have heard again how hard it is, and to Petra, obviously, I think and I hope that in a short period of time, we will also be able to see each other again in person at some point, and to continue the struggle. Thank you so much to everyone. I have a wonderful afternoon, and I don't know if there are still technical announcements to be made. I don't know, Marina, maybe you can help me out here if I've forgotten something, or otherwise I would just say thanks to everyone for participating. Great.